I would like to call the Corporate Services meeting to order and welcome those that are visiting live streaming this morning. At this point, I would ask for any declarations of pecuniary interest. Hearing none at this time, we are going to go to action items 2A, the 2018 budget. Betty Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I was pleased to be able to circulate in advance the report that we had prepared in response to the budget meetings that we had in late September, and also respond to the direction that had been provided. And you have received the planning and development organizational chart that was requested, also a analysis, a description of Bruce Works and the costing that was related to that and how we would offset those costs in future years and manage those. The revised departmental budgets when the SMT met and as a team and looked at what our goals and how they would fit into the county's overall strategic plan and the goals and what we could do to meet the target that committee had suggested for us to consider. And so we have brought in revised departmental budgets in human resources that we've indicated where the summer student has been removed from the budget, as well as the transfer to reserves for the future payroll replacement system. That was a $40,000 transfer to reserves. And in that, we're suggesting that we would consideration should be made in 2018 to create that reserve should there be available funds in the tax stabilization reserve, or the HR director will be reviewing the need for the health and safety vehicle reserve, and that could be reassigned. In the planning and development, we looked at transfer to reserves for the trails infrastructure, and the same message again that we would want to consider a transfer from the tax stabilization reserve, recognizing that they're two important projects that we need to start building reserves, but the 2018 budget may not have the capacity for it. But when the year-end results from 2017 are complete, there may be opportunities to reassign surplus funds to begin those building those reserves in 2018. And we also identified that there were capital expenditures related to $10,000 was for the Peninsula Hub, and that you'll recall we had established a reserve for that, and the initial budget was showing that from levy, and also a minor $1,500 in some software purchases that could be financed from an unspent reserve as well. We're also recommending that the visitor service desk at the museum, you'll recall that project was included, a portion of it from reserves, but $7,000 was from the levy, and we're recommending that that would be a good choice for a project to be financed from the tax stabilization reserve as well. There were other adjustments in transportation that were outlined, and just bring that report up. That we had outlined here as well, some of the other outstanding items. The health services, the Chesley Station upstaffing, just a reminder that that is not included in the draft budget, but that the Director of Health Services will be introducing a report regarding the that proposal and the other geographic locations that were identified during those discussions. The health services, the long-term care, the cladding project, a reminder that that also is not included in the draft budget, and the Director of Health Services will be preparing a report for your consideration. In transportation, the Director has reviewed their needs for 2018 and has reduced the budget by $340,000 with the transfer to the bridge reserves, the equipment reserves, the paved roads, and then finally an additional transfer from reserves of $15,200. Item number 6 in health services, the Port Elgin station. You'll recall that the budget included a transfer of $250,000 for that project, but then $50,000 of that was intended to be spent in 2018 for architectural and engineering consulting services. This now the budget that you have received today amends that budget to delete that $200,000 transfer to reserves, and that the $50,000 does remain, though, to begin the preliminary work in 2018, which would afford us the time to review how we would finance that project. And likely it would be long-term financing, but that $50,000 would give us, from the levy this year, would give us the capacity then to build on the repayment in future years of that long-term debt. Also noting that the provincial subsidy for paramedic services does not reflect the increase in 2018. We are still awaiting the 2017 funding, so there is some risk at increasing that without that knowledge. And finally, we heard from the committee at the meeting that you wanted us to consider some additional investment to the affordable housing program. We have provided this recommendation by advancing the final payment for the Grey Bruce Regional Health Centre and that capacity. So the payment in 2018 would actually be funded from the tax stabilization reserve. It had been our thought that in 2019 that $200,000 then would be available, but if you fund it from the tax stabilization reserve in 2018, that $200,000 then could be redirected to the affordable housing capital reserve and inject an additional $200,000 into that project. I did want to highlight that the 2019 project for the museum roofing project, it's been deleted from the budget. It's been ongoing for a few years. It's been under consideration, and to delay it again would be detrimental to the building, and in fact we would suggest that it should probably be reintroduced to committee and advanced in 2018, but that will be brought forward as recommendations with the tax stabilization reserve should there be funds after the external audit is completed, and we can redirect those funds. And finally, I just want to mention that this budget, as you've received, is a 3.54% increase, 2.27% in operations, and capital of 7.84%. Should committee choose to only invest $100,000 and not the full $200,000, that is the sort of the final one piece an additional piece of the puzzle, that 3.54 would be reduced to 3.3%. And keep in mind that is before any growth, and 1% increase on the levy is $434,000. We certainly have no details, but we are confident and that our investments that we have been making in the last couple of years within economic development and our other areas of operation will contribute to a noticeable increase. We're hopeful that at least 1.5, but certainly there is every ability to meet the 1%, which is the 434, which overall for a taxpayer would reduce that 3.54 to 2.54. And with that, I would just pass it over to our CAO for some additional comments.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the operational and capital budget that is before you for consideration has taken a lot of commitment on the part of the senior management team to get us to this stage. We're thrilled to be able to provide to you the two separated, which is a milestone for the county, and I think really helps in terms of the debate and the discussion as you consider what's before you. For the operational side of the house, the 2.27% does include the 3 positions that were presented to you, 2 full-time and 1 is an increase or a shift rather from to adjust for the library operation so that all supervisors are full-time. The museum position is showing at just slightly less than 30,000, driven by a view of conservatism that usually in the first year of that type of a fundraising position, it's difficult to see 100% of the wages covered in year one, just because of the nature of getting the person on board and setting the expectations. Following that, there would be a full understanding that the role would focus on the museum operations as well as the other areas that we have. I would offer lost opportunity operations, such as the library come to mind, that typically with estate planning there is usually a desire on the part of individuals to at least consider funding the library operations programmatically in particular. So with that, I have nothing else to offer, and between all of us, we can respond to any questions.
Good, thank you, Kelly. So I will open it up to council. Milt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we take into account the transfers now from our tax stabilization reserve, where are we now? Where do we sit now with these adjustments?
Through you, Mr. Warden, we had just over $500,000 in tax stabilization reserve, and we are anticipating, although it won't be presented until the November session, that we will be adding to that reserve in 2000 and at the end of 2018 with what would be forecast as a fairly significant surplus at the end of 2018. I don't think I have that. I should have had that number.
That's fine.
We have, I think there's 275,000 is coming from, and then the additional 200. So for the end of 2017, we would, this budget is utilizing most of the balance from at the end of 2017.
And the other question is the provincial subsidy for paramedic services. So we haven't received any comment from the ministry for 2017. So so what do we expect roughly? Like, is there an expectation there that we can look at 300,000 or 100,000 or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, at this point, we're taking an approach of conservatism because it's unusual that we're entering into October without having the funding confirmed. Mm-hmm. Again, as a reminder, the province's year runs from April to March, so we've been effectively funding the operations for 6 months. The caution that we have is they did open the Land Ambulance Act for discussion. They did proceed to formalize the desire to have pilot projects with fire services. To my knowledge, no community has volunteered for those 2 pilot projects. There is concern, though, that we do have a couple of single-tier counties that there may be, from their side of the house, operational efficiencies, i.e. Norfolk and Chatham-Kent. They operate both the paramedic service and fire service. The total dollar value, my recollection, is approaching $3.5 million, but I'd have to go back and look at the financials to confirm that. But I think that's in that neighborhood, 3.7 maybe.
I'm just wondering how close we are to 50-50 there. I could have checked, I guess, myself, but we can get that anyway. That's fine.
This document here would identify that our net expenditure is 10 million, and we were so we were looking at provincial funding of 5.4, it has grown significantly over the last few years as they had changed some of their policy. And so in this case is actually from this, what is proposed is showing that the revenue is greater than the 50%.
Yeah, which, yeah. So, but the last actual we have is back in 2016, right?
That's correct. And if you recall, in the years prior to that, we had not adjusted. We kept very conservatively maintained the value of the prior year. And then in 2017, we included it in the budget because there had been some stability around that formula. And of course, the first year we do that, then the province has delayed in providing. We used to get that number in April, and here we are in October. So.
Yeah. Yeah,
So there is risk even in that 2017, that 5.4 million that we had budgeted.
Yeah. The other question I have is, I guess, is why are we showing it more than 50%? And that, I don't need that answer.
Part of it is the way the capital is funded, because we don't get 50% on the capital. What we get is on the amortization costs. So that increases, actually works in our favor for the 50%. So there is a formula that is used to calculate this and was applied when the 2017 numbers were done. So it's not, so if you look in the costs up here, this is related to, well, the capital portion of it is not in this operation, another part of us splitting it out. So we'd need to
No,
yes.
that's fine. You, like, we
I
can,
think if we go back to the full requirement of paramedic services, and we'll see the capital component of it is the 659,000 that we would need to add to that, which would make it, even I forget sometimes that we have the two consolidated, we have them split apart, so it's hard to teach an old dog. So, so that's the other piece of that component.
good, thank you.
Other comments? Ann?
So I just want to make sure I've got this right. I think operationally, staff have done a good job, and our capital is what it is. There's always, as I said before, there's always that gap, but I think we've done pretty well. So with the growth, you're thinking can be in the 1 to 1.5%, and that's conservatively. I know we're starting to experience growth, but it might not be reflected till next year, as some of it. So I think you've done pretty well, and so with growth, we can be in the 2 to 2.5% range with conservative estimations.
We would certainly have no reason to believe, based on our last years where we had limited growth, that we would, at a minimum, have 1%.
Yes, because I think that was the figure last year was about 1%. 1.0. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Mike?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just, comment. 3.54 is really at the high end of what I was hoping for, but I know we often compare it to the Consumer Price Index. I've had a lot of discussion with different people. Consumer Price Index is really unfair at the municipal level because it takes a basket of goods that we don't buy. For instance, hot mix is not in the price of it, or a price of a bridge, so it's kind of misleading. I know it's an indicator, but we often say, the Consumer Price Index is 2, and we try to meet that. But it's unfair to do that because of those differences. But, I'm still struggling with the 3.54. I think it's right at the very top of where I would, and not say I'll vote against it. I just would like to hear some more comment around it. It's close, but
And if I certainly heard the message of where committee wanted it, I think bringing in the 3.54 was reflecting what the requirements were, but also recall that the $200,000 additional investment into affordable housing, and we debated whether or not, because we heard 3 to 3.5, and $100,000 investment would be a good start as well. But we thought it would be best to bring that forward to council at the 200,000, and should that was one area where I think I had indicated if the investment was 100,000, then that 3 would become 3.3.
David?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm in the same thinking as Mike. We suggested 3 to 3.5, but that's was my upper limit. But I think 3.54, we're close, and I can support that. That doesn't include the growth. The 1% will be off of that. That's correct? Yeah.
Robert?
Well, I know, especially our municipality, they like to see this down as low as possible. And I'd be more comfortable with a 3.3, but I don't know. It is what it is. The costs keep going up all the time, and we have to keep things up. So I'd be satisfied with 3.54 if that is really necessary. Okay.
I'm going to get to both of you, so who wants to go first? Paul, first.
So Betty Ann, the affordable housing is clearly necessary, but reducing the 100,000 brings us to a 3.3, which I think is probably the route to go for now. But the affordable housing, we can start to build or catch up on that in 2019. We'd be more able to build up in 2019 because 2018 is the last year of the $200,000 commitment to the regional health center. Is that what you're saying there?
What we're doing in this budget that we presented you today is actually advancing that and having really that 2017 would have been the last year where it was funded from the levy and opening. So it's really, we're just transferring, financing that final payment from the tax stabilization reserve from the surplus, and then reassigning that $200,000 into affordable housing. So it's
from the levy.
So there would be no, the capacity would have been built in the 2018 budget, not in 2019. Now, we know that there were other areas that impacted the 2018 budget that we wouldn't see, particularly in our operations. A lot of it related to the salaries and benefits that were adjusted. You saw those numbers in 2018. So, and we know every year there's after another 12 months of business and priorities, there are always changes. But this budget, what we really wanted to do was to continue to stabilize for future years, and particularly in the capital side as well, while we're building for the infrastructure deficit that we know that we currently have.
So it's in my opinion, it's still okay to reduce the housing to 100,000, knowing that we can increase it in 19 to 200 when 100,000 in the 18 budget will still allow us to sort out or figure out or study what we want to do, if anything at all. The other thing on the budget, I agree that the staff have done a lot of work. I like the process. I just, I guess I'm asking you, Mitchell or Kelly, on process. So adopting this budget at either one of those rates, does that mean that if something was in the budget that it's a done deal and they can go ahead, or does it mean there's things in the budget that I'm uncomfortable with? Let's put it that way. Does that mean if we pass the budget that those positions are go ahead, or does it come back? Does it come back to this table for more discussion and final decision?
Through you, Mr. Warden, typical with prior activities, it would be you're approving the addition of those positions. By approving the budget, we would proceed with the recruitment beginning in January, not before January.
Milt?
Just to refresh my memory again, so those positions, are they in there for a full year, or they're in there for a full year? And what was the total of all of those positions?
The HR generalist, which is not the term that has been promoted, but just for clarification, the HR position, I should say, is 86,000, almost 87,000. The library is just shy of 7,000, and the museum, assuming a 50% revenue factor, is 29,000. So the full, yeah, 58,000 for a full year.
Pardon me?
For a full year, it would be 58,000 for the position, but we've assumed revenue of 50% of that value.
So the net,
the net
for
is
the full year is
29,000.
So, but for the three of them is about 110,000.
Yes, thereabouts.
So which we will not achieve, of course, probably, if we start advertising in January. So I
think what we've tried to do.
Follow up to Paul's question, actually.
Certainly. I think what we've tried to do so that we don't have the gapping in the next year is to any new positions that we would have the full amount of the budget, so we not bringing back and providing that. But I think if council was to approve the budget in advance of obviously January 1st, recruitment could begin right away with the expectation to try to fill those positions as early in 2018 as possible.
Just one other comment too, like, you know, and as we spend money during the year from our tax stabilization fund, I mean that, I know it's spending reserved, but we did raise the money to create that reserve, so.
Yes, and if I could just add, there will be a report. I think the last time I presented a report was a couple of months ago as to the activity on that tax stabilization reserve, and there's a report scheduled to be brought back to this committee at the November meeting so that you continue to see what the activity is in that program.
Oh, sorry, Kelly.
Excuse me, through you, Mr. Warden. The other part that I would like to remind council of is we've had, Betty Ann, just before we started, reminded me that this week is my 5th year anniversary with Bruce County and how much she's enjoyed those 5 years. But in the 5 years, through the support and leadership of council, we have really undertaken a lot of improvements to the operations of the county as a whole. And the part that Betty Ann is alluding to in terms of the November report, when I started with the county, the 2 homes, as an example, were running significant deficits year after year after year. And it certainly is looking like we're going to be in surplus position for the 2 homes at the end of 2017. And that has come through the leadership of the staff and the commitment of the staff. And last year the directors will all appreciate this. It can be as difficult to have a sizable surplus as to have a sizable deficit. In the area of health services, that group have done a lot of really good work. The support of the finance team for that group have provided some significant improvements. And in particular, we now have the start of the the start of the centralized scheduling for the 24/7 operations. And I would offer next year at this time, it's going to continue to be a positive message. The only item that's in the operational budget that is a new project is the project connected to Bruce Works. And we appreciate that looks like a lot of money. It has the potential to completely alter how staff are able to deliver their work. And so ultimately the 2.27% for operational activities, I'm very proud of it. I think that the team have done a lot of really good work, and that's something that not very many communities are able to hold up and say we're doing a major project in 2018, and we're doing it at the cost of 2% on the bottom line that will pay for itself in future years. Capital is not as advanced as I think all of us would like it to be, but we've made, again, in the last number of years, we've made a lot of improvements to get it to this stage so that all of you can start to see the true cost of the infrastructure that it takes. We do have concerns, and we share your concerns about affordable housing. We do have concerns about the transportation and environmental services area, and we share those concerns with you as well. And hearing about the concern about the combined consolidated 3.5%, I would ask for consideration to retain the operational side, and if you need us to further do work on the capital side, that we do that. But to make a change, excuse me, to get to a number of the 3.25, 3.3%, I would hope we do that through the capital side rather than the operational side. The 3 positions are truly needed. Of the 3, the HR position is really important for us as an employer to advance how we care for our employees. We have gaps today. We've had those gaps. We've made improvements, and we're at a stage where to add an additional person will change the nature of the employee relationship for the better in a big way. And I know it's difficult every time to add individuals to the headcount piece, but last year at this time we brought forward a document, and we can certainly update it, of all of the legislative changes that have been absorbed at the county. Those aren't going away. If anything, they're getting more challenging to absorb. The stuff as simple as the changes to the Municipal Act, that takes people to do those analysis. And that has nothing to do with HR. Bill 148, the Fair Workplaces Act, that's currently before the legislature, even in a modified form, it's going to take a huge amount of HR resources to implement what they are recommending. Stuff as simple as the payment of a stat day for part-time people. What's being promoted is a very difficult formula to deal with, and it takes people to deal with that type of stuff. So I do hope that with the 3.5, if we need to make a reduction, I would recommend and hope for your consideration that comes from the capital side of the equation.
Thank you, Kelly. Janice?
I think my big concern has always been with staffing and salaries and benefits. I'm wondering, so with this HR position, it's a compensation and benefits specialist, I think, is that position. Is that being carried out by current employees now? Like, is that position being shared by 1 or 2 or 3 current HR staff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, it's currently shared across more than, it's actually 3 positions directly.
And they're just, those 3 people are overworked? Like, you really think they've got too much on their plate? That's...
Today, that is the case, and again, without any changes to other pieces of legislation. So just at the moment, we're averaging about 10 hours of overtime a week by the individuals.
Okay, that's interesting. My other question is through the chair to Kathy. The position, the fund development, or whatever that position is officially called, at what point do you think we're going to be actually looking at some revenue? Like the first year, you think that position will gain about $29,000 or $30,000 worth of revenue, but putting us still in the whole 30. At what point do you think we're actually going to see a profit through that position?
Well, as we had stated in the budget, exactly, the first year we're looking at half of the salary. Hopefully, by the 2nd to 3rd year, we would start to see full salary out of that position, and if not more, right? So it will take time for the individual, obviously, to establish themselves within the community, but that position, again, doesn't have any supervisory responsibility, so their sole position is, and responsibility is, to raise income.
So we'll be down the first year, we should be even the 2nd year, and then making money in the 3rd year?
I would hope so.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay. And the only other concern that I had, which I voiced before, was with the highways department and tendering out all the road work, but not reducing the staffing. I still can't quite get my head around that, but however, those are my concerns, and of course I'd still be happy at a 2% increase, but that's not going to happen.
Okay, thank you, Janice. Brian, did you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Yes, we anticipate a 3 to 5 year transition, and as recently as yesterday, we're talking about changes to the manpower, person power requirements.
Ann?
Janice, you're talking about fundraising. The tough part when I've been involved in fundraising is the first year or 2, and so I'm kind of thinking, you know, after you kind of get it established, it's not nearly as difficult because you have your kind of your circle, your contacts. So I think the position for fundraising for the museum, possibly the time would be reduced in the future, because you know, the new person has to go around. For example, when I was with the Pine River Watershed, you know, it did consume a lot of my time going around, but then all of a sudden OPG, once I got them on board, they contributed every year. It was just a matter of a phone call and you know, filling out a bit of forms, but it wasn't the extensive work once we got rolling. So I think I can support the position for the museum if it's evaluated in you know, say 2 or 3 years, just to see if it's really as necessary for full-time. Maybe it can be cut back to half-time, and that person, by then, maybe there's other duties at the museum that they can be rolled into or something. That's just from my experience fundraising.
Janice?
I agree with you, Ann. I mean, it is a sales position, basically, and it does take time to build your clientele, and I know I've been working through that with different organizations, and sometimes it takes a long time to get to that point where you break even and then you're making money. Other times it doesn't happen at all, actually, and you're in a losing position and have been perpetually. So I think I agree with your suggestion or thought that maybe that's something that could be reviewed in 3 or 4 years and see if that position is turning some money back into the county or whether we're at a perpetual loss. But you know, I'm all for it any way that we can make money. Absolutely.
Paul?
That's exactly the position that's bugging the hell out of me, that to get a fundraiser and basically they're fundraising to pay their own salary, that doesn't sit good with me at all. It's not about the 36,000 in the budget and the 3.5%. It's just suggesting approving the budget today means we're going to go ahead with that project without any further conversation. Maybe that conversation, maybe you can cut me off anytime you want, Mitchell. Maybe we're walking on thin ice here. Maybe it should be enclosed. I don't know. But I guess number one, we don't even have a project yet. Yeah, there's been discussion. I think we're all well. We'd like to perhaps someday see the archives improved. We haven't got there. We haven't approved that. So to suggest we need to bring a fundraiser on in January that's going to be funded for half its salary, I'm not there. I can't support that.
Janice?
Well, I think the objective is to increase the memberships and to get corporate sponsorships. I mean, I'm kind of speaking for Kathy here. I apologize, but I mean, I totally understand what you're saying, Paul, but I also think it's a position that you kind of have to make an investment in. You have to be willing to take a loss for a year or two before you see a profit. But it's a chance. It's very chancy. There's no question about it.
Ann?
So Paul, were you thinking even half-time would be enough, or wait until we have a definite project? It's kind of a catch-22.
Yeah, well, I guess I thought we had already embarked on a study that was to come back to see if it's even feasible for the community to raise X number of dollars, which I think was $6 million. We haven't seen the result of that, and yet we're willing to embark on a fundraiser for a project we don't have. So I'm okay with even leaving the funds in the budget, but before we race out and hire somebody in January, I just would like to have a good, healthy conversation here. Are we going to do that, or do we are we going to get someone started by the 1st of June? Maybe by June we'll have a project and we'll know why we're raising funds. I don't know what I agree that a fundraiser, but I think the fundraiser maybe needs to be funded from the levy rather than from the funds they're receiving. I have trouble thinking that someone's going to give to the museum for a capital project and find out that most of that money went to cover that person's salary. That's the part that's bothering me. But don't get me wrong, I want to support the museum, and I'm fully aware that the archives need expanded, but I think we got the cart ahead of the horse here. And, I think that's enough negative talk for one day, Mitchell.
I'm sure you'll have more. Kelly?
Through you, Mr. Warden, the recommendation can certainly be that the budget be approved at this level with the expectation that the museum director return with a report for consideration prior to anything occurring in that area, if that would reassure Councillor Eagleson.
Does that reassure you, Mr. Eagleson?
I'd be very happy with that. Congratulations on your 5th anniversary. Right.
Milt?
Just going way back to Kelly's comments, and maybe we've all forgot about them, but Kelly was mentioning about the legislation and the amount of time and effort and work it takes to deal with new legislation, and I agree with that. It's totally true. I mean, we all are, and we're all dealing with that, both here and locally. And the other thing as well is the homes, and I also appreciate the fact that the homes, or the deficit is, we're not running a deficit anymore, and the homes, I'm very proud of our homes. So, but what I do look at is the transfer. That's what I look mostly at, is the transfer to our homes. So that transfer continues to increase if you look at it over the years, and so that's what I look at in the homes aspect of things. And with regards to the operations, I can agree to your 2.7 in operations, and maybe if we had to look at a little something in capital, it might help a bit.
Kelly?
Through you, Mr. Warden, the other piece too, with Councillor McGeever's comment about the transfer or the requirement of the levy. In 2012, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care introduced the new Long-Term Care Act, and it has taken most of the counties that are in the Southwest region, I say most because Simcoe is probably the one exception, to really come to terms with that new piece of legislation and what it means in terms of the delivery of care to the residents. I hope that we are in a position in January to be able to start to provide reassurance to you that the operational improvements that we've made will have an impact in 2018 on our ask for the levy, because it has been challenging. Everyone in the southwestern region continues to be challenged with staffing and continues to struggle between the registered staff and the non-registered staff, and altering the nature in which we deliver that care model, because we do have the non-registered staff who are really bearing a heavy burden, physically a heavy burden, with the nature of how we deliver that care to the residents. In terms of, also to Councillor McGeever's question, in terms of the capital side of the house, I guess if we're talking about making some adjustments, the smoothest and simplest would be to alter the commitment from the 200,000 to the 100,000 for the affordable housing, with the expectation that 100 would come back to you in 2018 for the 2019 capital budget year. The other areas are, again, a relatively simple one is that the architectural work that is suggested for 2018 for a new station, that too be funded from the tax stabilization rather than from the capital budget. Right now, although the transportation number is a big number, if we were to make any adjustment there, it could have an unfavorable impact on the delivery model, in particular the bridge program for 2018. The non-departmental part, I don't know if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, refer back to the Director of Corporate Services on what, if any, opportunity exists within that line.
We have made some recommendations there related to particularly the provincial offences revenue, and we have noticed that decline, and that has always each year contributed to our a deficit at year end, and this budget builds $75,000, a reduction in provincial offences with that change, while incorporating a modest increase in supplemental taxes and investment income. But we have been struggling with the provincial revenue offences over the last number of years, and we continued with some changes in collections. We were certain that those numbers were going to increase, and while they've pretty much the last 2-3 years stabilized, and it was my recommendation that we absorb that and move forward in 2018.
Kelly? Oh, sorry, Janice?
I just wanted to go back briefly to the staffing. Would it be more beneficial? Like, I'm totally in favor of developing our own people and advancing them. Would it be any more beneficial economically to take an existing person and maybe roll them into this new compensation and benefit specialist and give them a little bit of extra money, and then hire a junior to replace some of that? Like, has anybody looked at that option?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is something that the team could look at. There would have to be an assessment of both the skill set and the education of the existing portfolio. But I mean, we would do that. The financial savings would I don't anticipate that they would be very high, because it would mean having we would reduce a position elsewhere. If we were to go down that path, then that would suggest we have excess staffing elsewhere in the organization, and maybe we do. It wouldn't be within the HR department.
Because hiring somebody at a junior level obviously is going to save in salaries.
Yeah.
And the other question I have, when we had the dinner, the employee anniversary dinner, service recognition dinner, thank you so much. You know, I sat with a great table of people, of course, from my own neck of the woods, and they were in Gateway Haven, and it was interesting because they had talked about really wanting to increase their education and to be able to move up in the organization. And it was interesting because when you looked at those awards, there were some people that got 20 and 30-year recognition awards, and they were in the exact same position that they were in 30 years ago. And they hadn't grown at all within the organization and excelled. And that was one of the things that I heard at the table sitting with those gals, that they really desperately wanted to grow. And but there was no courses that were available to them through the county that would advance them career-wise. I mean, they want to stay within the organization and within Gateway Haven, but they wanted to better their employment. And so I'm just wondering, was there ever any kind of a program to help our own employees educate themselves and advance within the corporation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, and I guess we will need to get some names from the individual that you've articulated, because we've had a program for a number of years that is designed to do that. We do focus on retraining and enhanced training in areas that are both needed and our natural career progressions. So we typically would not, as an example, we typically would not train a highways individual for an HR generalist role, because typically there isn't a natural career progression there. But where there is, we absolutely do, and it's a bit concerning to hear that.
There were several people at the table, it wasn't just one. So maybe that's something that Michael might look into at Gateway Haven and Bruce Lee Haven and anywhere else in the organization. Thank you.
Ann?
Well, I hate to say this, but I agree with Paul as far as when you're fundraising. When I look at fundraising, I kind of look at the organization, and if more than 10% of my donations are going to administration or paying for the person, I just move on to the next thing that I kind of am going to donate dollars to. So I know everybody's trying to get the levy down, but it's all dollars. It's just shifting it around. I think I think we need to look at that, and if the staff person is really needed for the first year, maybe it can just be half-time and be on the levy, or a portion, still leave 10% maybe in as part of the fundraising costs. But and just from talking to other people about what they donate to, that 10 to 15% is kind of a range, but I'd like to hear other people's opinion.
I would just maybe add to that, just maybe to add some clarification, because that is correct. That's how we've demonstrated the budget this year, that we're saying we need to, that we'd like to add this position, and it's going to be $58,000. So to the 29,000, I think we've expressed it in that way, just so that for ease of you understanding. But I think it's not really that we're, 50% of it's going to be what somebody donates, $100, $50 of it is going to go to pay for that person's salaries. I mean, yes, it could be considered in that way, but really we would hire that position, and then we would fund 100% of that position would be funded from the levy, and 100% of their donations would be used to offset projects, whether it be endowments, funding, and some of those items. And I know we have struggled even with finance, the finance team having conversations with financial people and looking at that opportunity, and we've seen other organizations using it, and we haven't. And whether it's in wills or we just haven't had the resources to be able to support the museum to be able to do that. And I think it's, if maybe we just need to look at it that we're hiring a position, but all of the funds that come in would be 100% used towards the museum and cultural center, and we have seen experience in the past where people do want to support that. It's a great facility. So from the finance team, it's something that we have reviewed and have met with, but have just never been able to take it a step further to be able to make that happen. So,
just for clarification, the Krug donation, is that something that we could use for a 3-year contract position rather than annualizing that through the budget?
No, it's not for salaries. It's the Krug Foundation is very specific.
Okay, just a question. Robert, then Ann?
Have you checked out with other counties for their museums? Do they have a person on staff for fundraising? Have you checked that out?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have, but I will defer to Director Kathy to respond.
Yeah. So for a large number of museums, especially more the provincial or the federal funders, there's development positions. And those positions are specifically, again, not just looking at project related, they can be project based, but they're also looking at things like foundations, estate planning, bequests, things of that nature. Those are things that we've never really done in the past. Again, we have been very successful on the corporate side, and all of the funding for the corporate sponsorships goes directly back into the programming or the exhibits that take place. So as an example, with the First Nations exhibit, full funding for that exhibit has been funded through grants and through sponsorship. So there are examples of other museums, Kitchener-Waterloo, the museum in Kitchener-Waterloo, they have a development position, so there are several other museums that do have this position on staff.
Ann?
No, that's good. It's good information and clarification. And I think when you're fundraising, if you make that clear, you know, that all the donations go to the museum, that's just, I just want to make sure that was clarified. So you know, the museum is great. It's a great addition to Bruce County, but I think when you're fundraising, that's an important point to make.
If I may, Mr. Chair, the only point of clarity is that if we had funding come in for another source, we would still, with the approval of the position, we would still receive those dollars. So, for example, if the individual did a series of discussions with people on the lakeshore, and one individual said that they would really prefer to give money to the library system, we would still take those dollars for the library system, would be the recommendation.
Mike?
I'm really not hung up on the position so much. I think, you know, I certainly trust our senior staff to think that this is going to be a worthwhile position. I think we're struggling over trying to get to down below 3.5 or take $100,000 or so out of this budget. I'm not going to tell you where to take it, but I would say you would have my support if you could get and again, I mean, if we don't go anywhere else, but I think we'd all be more comfortable. I want to go back to what Milt first raised, and I appreciate your conservativeness around land ambulance, the 50-50, but I think every year we've seen an increase in that, and I think you could probably find some money there if you wanted to take a gamble. I really don't even think it's going to gamble. If you went back, you probably get some there, and I don't think that the Premier wants to run around the province next year saying she's cut land funding to land ambulance, because every one of us will be talking about it, you know. So, but and again, I'm not going to tell you where to do it. I would be happy at 3.3. I really think that $100,000, the affordable housing need in this community is bigger than I like to see it, and I would not want to take $100,000 out of affordable housing. So, if you can get it to 3.3 some other way, you got my vote.
Milt?
I agree with Mike, and I guess not taking it from social housing is probably a good thing. But I wouldn't want to see it taken from highways. Seems to be a pretty easy spot to go and pick 100,000, and I think there's a huge deficit there as well. So I would prefer you look somewhere else other than that as well. So, but with that, I would let staff decide where it comes from.
So I'm hearing 3.3. I'd like to really see the surplus fund as part of this too, because there's maybe room where we can put the $100,000 back in to, because at the end of the year, it'd be nice to know just generally where we're going to be, and because we've talked people these dollars, and I mean, what better place to go than to affordable housing at this point, as far as I'm concerned, because of the issues we're having in Bruce County, and I think that's a good place to go. But obviously, it's easy to pick $100,000 right now. Betty Ann's showing that up there right now. There's 3.3, but with the surplus dollars, folks, if that was you know, council's wishes, then we could use another $100,000 to go towards affordable housing. We don't have to decide that today, but or we can just take a 5-minute break.
It's up to Kelly and Betty Ann. Would you sooner we take a break and or do it next week, something like that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we were to be given a general support for what's been presented of 3.3, then we would convene with the senior management team. That would be my preference, and have a discussion of the how and the where for it.
So with 3.3, I will ask council or committee's thoughts. Is that a number that we're willing to accept, 3.3? Ann?
Knowing the social housing needs, I'm reluctant to take the 100,000 out, but if there's kind of an agreement, if there's a chance with depending on our surplus at the end of the year, like you said, that we could put it back in, but I would go with the 3.3 now.
Everyone else? Okay, why don't we take, say, 10 minutes?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if there, it will take the senior management team more time to have a discussion. At this point, I would offer that it certainly would not be something I would recommend to the organization to either reduce capital in affordable housing or in highways. Both of those areas are at the cusp of being able to address their funding gap, and if that was the source of the 100,000, it would be problematic, I think, for the long term. And given that, I would prefer to have a lengthy discussion with the senior management team about other options. Yeah. And we could return it for the corporate services in November.
How does that sound? Well, we have the, don't we have the planning department's corporate structure? Or? Okay, so we don't have to deal with it. Okay. Do you want to go back to the agenda then, please?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, Janice?
Thank you, sir. Christine, of the affordable housing projects, what percentage of that is earmarked towards seniors' affordable housing? Like, what's the balance between that?
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
So currently, our portfolio is distributed about 60% seniors, and then about 15% family, and then the balance is adult.
Okay, thanks. The senior gap is huge. Like, there's a lot of seniors. I know in my municipality that there's just not enough affordable housing for seniors in South Bruce Peninsula, that's for sure. And that's something I would really like to address in the next year. So I totally support that initiative. I wouldn't want to see any cuts there either.
Through you, Chair, just to clarify too, so the ratio that I shared was our current portfolio mix, so that's what we have available. Our wait list actually shows us that our higher need falls again in that adult category, so either singles or couples that are looking for housing more so than the seniors, and I think it's because we have a large distribution of our ratio is available for seniors, but of course we're looking at the broad continuum and making sure that we're providing for all the different types that are required.
Okay, any other comments or concerns before we adjourn? Okay, I would like to thank staff for all their hard work getting us to where we are today, but I know we have the dedicated staff to get us to where we want to be. So thank you for all your work, and a motion to adjourn. Milt, seconded by Ann. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Thank you.